Hi everyone, welcome. My name's Raman, Sidhu. I actually recently started at Alkimi a couple of months ago as Chief Strategy Officer. And my background is in AdTech, having spent about 9 years co-founding and having an AdTech company acquired. So I've been working with the team to help narrate what we have been working on for the last couple of years in a more palatable way towards this industry. So we've got a team of experts on the panel, which represent the full scope of the industry from brand to agency and also ad tech and publisher in terms of background. And what we're going to be talking about today is effectively rewiring ad tech and doing so moving from the existing structure, which we could call a Web 2 structure, to more of a blockchain one and a Web 3 structure, and what the benefits of that are. I've been thinking about, from a business perspective, what is the difference between Web 2 and Web 3? And when we look at pretty much every Web 2 business, from a startup that's had investment to Google, one thing remains the same. They are all kind of focused on delivering returns to shareholders. And shareholder growth often comes in the way of profits. And one easy way to make profits, a quick way, is of course to increase the margins you make from your existing customers. When we look at a Web3 business, take Alkimi for example, the focus is around delivering value to the community and token holder growth. The community happens to be token holders. So when we think about delivering value to the community, it's often in this case, in the case of Alkimi, around maintaining and growing a free and open internet. And that often comes with, in our case, delivering more value to the constituent parts, which is not the ad tech piece, but the advertisers, agencies, and publishers which keep this industry going. So that's a bit of an introduction from myself. Going around this way, it'd be great to introduce you.
Sure. So my name is Sherrick Chavda, and I am at Initiative, and I head up audience and data strategy for Europe. And effectively, my role as part of the team is to take leadership in terms of how we look to progress everything around audience data and technology for our clients. And I think what's fascinating, especially from an agency perspective, is that we're kind of right in the coalface with the client. We're working really hard with the publishers. We're kind of both ends of the barrel for the good and bad. And I think for us, it's really about focusing on how we support our clients in the right way, facilitating their goals, but also thinking about kind of the future of our industry as well. It's a tricky place to be, but I think it's also probably one of the more exciting places to be as well. So, yeah, that's my role.
I'm Sameer Amin. I'm the Global Director of Data-Driven Marketing and Media at Reckitt. So my job is to basically make sure that Reckitt has the right infrastructure to do digital marketing to the best of its capability. We've traditionally been a TV advertiser, and then trying to apply the same tactics on TV to digital is not a smart move, because when you advertise cheap on TV, you get old profiles, you get a lot of frequency. You do that on digital, you get viewability problems, you get brand safety problems, you get authentication problems. So therefore, we've had to reinvent our operating structures, our scope of work, the infrastructure, to make sure that we have the right capabilities and not modeled to do digital really well globally.
Thanks. I'm Claire Gleeson-Landry. I'm Head of Investment and Sustainable Media at Goodloop. What Goodloop does is make it easy and profitable for brands to do good, whether that's through display advertising or how those campaigns are distributed. So we have consumer-facing products, and we also have sort of back-end optimization products as well. And my job is basically to sell them and come and teach people about the ways of prioritizing sustainability. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'd like to draw on some of the use cases and examples which Ben talked through during his presentation, which being transparency, fees, and the environment as well. I guess starting with transparency, it'd be good for us to understand what your businesses have been doing already in making steps to make programmatic and the supply chain there more transparent?
Sure. So I'm very lucky that actually some of the Kinesso folk are here today, and Kinesso are our lead performance agency, and at the moment we're working quite hard as a group to really clean up the whole supply chain, right, in any which way we can. And I think it starts off with the SSPs, trying to figure out actually how do we audit these SSPs in the right way. We rethink about that auditing process. It's less about fees and thinking about those other elements that start driving growth for our clients and improve performance. So that's probably step one, is that clean up step. I think the next stage is really understanding what does transparency mean. And with no disrespect to clients, it's really understanding what do they need to know, right? Because I think depending on the client understanding their kind of knowledge base, sometimes it's very fearful, opens up a lot of questions, clients who probably don't need to know that much. But then you've got a lot of clients who actually understand it and get it, and actually you can win really well with them. So I think that's kind of the steps that we're taking at the moment. And it's not easy, but I think, look, just touching on some of the stuff Ben mentioned, I think the stuff that you guys are doing is definitely our way forward as well. So thinking about how different buying methodologies can be used to help inform how we start cleaning up and what we should be auditing these partners on. So from our perspective, that's kind of the initial steps that we're taking right now. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I guess right from inception, Goodloop has always operated on a very transparent model. Like yourselves, we are a B Corporation. It is hard work. Well done.
2 of 2 on this
yeah,
this
great.
room, right?
Super duper. That doesn't mean that you have to be a B Corp in order to operate with ethics and purpose and do the right thing, I guess. But it certainly helps, and it sort of gives you access to a huge community of really awesome organisations. But Goodloop was founded to make advertising more engaging and more interesting, and to give people a reason to engage with advertising again. It was founded at a time when people were becoming a lot more aware of the value of their eyeballs and their data, and people were downloading more and more ad blockers because advertising was really bloody annoying. And so the premise of Goodloop ultimately is to give people a reason to engage, and when they do, they are rewarded. And we're really, really transparent about that reward. And we're also really, really transparent about how campaigns are distributed with our clients, but also the fees that we take. So yeah, it's always been baked in. I think startups are probably in a better position to be able to build on with those building blocks. With legacy companies, it takes a long time to shift that way of working. So yeah, we kind of have the benefit of being able to go, oh, if I was to build my perfect company, what would it include? And transparency, sustainability were all sort of the building blocks of the organisation.
Great. Sam?
So when I joined Reckitt in 2012, I saw a chart similar to what got shown up in terms of supply chain and how much of my media budgets were going into the supply chain and how much was taken out. And I saw that chart from ISBA in May, and the numbers were the same. And it just shocked me. 10 years later, we're still going with the same issues. And I think one of the things we've tried to do at Reckitt is take ownership of our tech stack. Because I work from agency perspective, and I kind of knew sort of the markups we were making, and I wanted to make sure that we were fair to our agencies and rewarded them accordingly, but we wanted to take ownership and transparency of the supply chain and where we could optimize how we were spending our money. And I think transparency allowed us to do that. By doing that, we basically increased our ROIs of digital. And that wasn't the case, because when we were trying to use digital, like I said, on sort of TV, using the same creative, using the same mindsets, we were getting really poor ROI. And then everyone, even me, when I was in the UK and US, I was basically saying, I'm not going to spend on digital. And I fought my global team every single step away, saying this is a waste of money. And TV was driving the biggest returns for us. Now I'm in a global role and I'm shifting digital. We put the right infrastructure in place. We've got the right transparency, the right op model, the right technology, the right partners, and the right capabilities. And we've seen now, for the first time ever, digital drive more sales than TV. And that's what transparency has allowed us to do, is optimize. where we basically can double down on investment and where we basically take the waste out of the system.
Thanks. I think it's probably worthwhile reiterating the 2022 ISBA study. 95% of the buy-side to sell-side technologies were not connected in a way which was providing financial transparency, which made it quite difficult for PwC to do the audit. But from the 5% which was transparent, of course, there was a fee structure which came out of it. And I think it's probably worthwhile considering if you were to get to closer to 100% transparency, what would that mean for programmatic budgets and how you look to grow the business?
Yeah, I think for us, that obviously it'd be a game changer, right? But I think the conversations that we start having with our clients, with our internal teams, become a lot more profound. I think you start moving into spaces where actually it's less about those things that used to trip you up, the stuff that used to keep you up late at night when, you know, we've all had that situation where clients message you with a screenshot saying, look at this ad on this site, and you're spending all night trying to figure out where it is. All of a sudden, that transparency element makes it really clear, quick, let's move on, let's get this right. And you're focusing your time, your effort, and your resources in the right space. You're having more high-quality conversations around strategy, how do we drive ROI? All of a sudden, when it comes down to attribution as well, all of this should really help with that as well, really understanding who is driving that performance. And I think for me, it's kind of a two-pronged approach. It's the measurement side, attributing programmatic in the right way. And then, and by the way, it's the CPMs are cheaper, the quality is higher, there's less ad fraud. All of a sudden we get more impressions, CPAs are bound to come down. It just becomes I hate to say it's quite a simple conversation, but I think for me, it just takes conversations into a much more strategic, profound place rather than focusing on the problems. And I think that's where I see the real power from this coming from.
Yeah, in many ways, it's about providing insights back to the clients yourselves. This morning, in fact, Connor, the Mediacom team, came out with an idea that if we were to provide aggregated insights on the market of what different brands are spending, and which would help brands understand their share of screen or share of voice in the market just as well. Over to you, Sam, same question.
So you might not like what I'm about to say in terms of the transparency has allowed us to kind of cut the fat. So I wouldn't say I would increase my budget. I would say I'm going to reduce it because it allows me, if I know I'm wasting 40% or 50%, I'm not going to ask my marketing directors or the financial guys to ask for more money. I say, basically, I can cut 25% of that, reinvest the other 25%, get better reach. So I think that level of transparency has allowed us to have those types of conversations with our agency partners and our internal teams that trade media. So it's also one of the key things that when you're on a client side, you also understand that in the kind of lack of transparency, there's so much people making money. And it's interesting about blockchain because I spoke to a blockchain company about 5 years ago. And I asked them, I get it, and as a client, I love it. But I'm also a very practical person. I said, all I know about blockchain at that time was everyone has to put their hand up to say, I want to be part of Ledger. Now, all I'm going to do is find out that this person's making 5%, I'm going to cut them. This person's making 10%, I'm going to cut them. So what incentive is it for someone to raise their hand to say, I'm making money that you didn't know of? And that's when I spoke to that lady maybe a year ago, and that company basically didn't exist anymore. And she said, you had a point, where transparency is easy to say. It's hard to do because there's so many people making money off. Yeah. And trying to get a common definition of transparency and getting all these people trying to work together, especially like on reach. Like there's loads of Project Halo where all these companies are trying to work out how we can drive one view on reach. And I'm saying, I don't think it's possible because too many people are making money from the status quo.
I think you're totally right. And in that example, you're talking effectively by a horizontal structure of transparency, one which you've got to get all the ad tech companies to say that I'm in on this transparency, which won't work, which is why we approached it with a vertical approach, which means only our supply chain and the one which we are effectively syncing up the auction ID to the transaction ID can be transparent. So we did explore the other side as well, and maybe it's something for like 10 years down the line, but not for now.
You'd think transparency would be a trend that we could all genuinely get behind, in the same way as viewability a few years ago. Of course, you only want to pay for ads that are definitely being seen. Like, that's literally the point of advertising. And I think the issue of transparency is that, it won't necessarily move the needle in terms of winning budget, but efficacy will. And, transparently useless data is still useless. So it's what you're getting, what's in the sausage, who cares about that? Do clients really care? It's great for small businesses. They probably they're not bothered about everything being disclosed. But for those big brands that really care about where they show up, and that what they're saying in their creative is reflected in how they distribute their media as well, it's crucial. So yeah, small businesses, fine, get some reach, use Google PMax, get your performance going, absolutely fine, lovely little black box over there. But for those really big brands that have got massive sort of purpose-led statements, really add value to consumers, and ultimately they're winning hearts and minds. They're not trying to sell more products. They're trying to, win market share from other brands, ultimately. How do they ensure that where they show up is connected directly to what they stand for as a brand as well? And that's something that Good Loop works with brands glove in hand all the time. You can't have a campaign that's sort of like anti-bullying, bank supporting anti-harassment or whatever, and then it ends up next to the sidebar of shame, for example. It's inauthentic. And so that transparency around that is should be going through absolutely everything. But yeah, transparently useless is still useless information, right? So
100%. I think talking around Sam's point in terms of reducing the types of supply vendors that you're working with, cutting bad publishers or made for advertising. But then, of course, there's going to be a reallocation going back towards quality media.
You would hope.
Yeah, quality engagements as well. In your experiences where there have been, of course, you guys have taken control of supply path optimization and the fee structure. What have you seen in terms of the efficacy improving when there has been less fees stripped from the supply chain?
Yeah, I guess I can give an example for a campaign that we actually ran with yourself with Amazon, and it was through our Kinesso team, where effectively what we saw was we did a 50-50 kind of A/B test with Alkimi and a whole bunch of other SSPs. We saw that Alkimi drove 200% less CPM rates, improved ad quality and ad engagement rates, and great story off the bat. But I think what was really interesting was actually once you start getting under the hood of everything, what we understood was the take rates. And that was something which I don't think we've ever really kind of looked at. It's something that's spoken about. We see it on lovely charts like that. But unless you actually get under the hood of it and actually realize, actually how much are all these people taking, it was quite stark. And we were seeing kind of with the big players out there between around 15 to 20% take rates versus the 1.5% that kind of Alkimi took. And I think just from those initial numbers, it has become a very easy conversation to start opening up new opportunities and tests. I think something we spoke about before was that as easy as it is to show those numbers, communicating blockchain to clients and less digital native people is always going to be a challenge. There's immediately that wall put up, crypto, scared, can't talk about it, move away. Whereas I think we're now getting to a position where we're testing more, we're trialing more with more savvy clients who understand it and get it. I think working with you guys will have a better story and narrative and a cleaner story and narrative that kind of makes it a little bit less scary. But at least from the examples and kind of tests that we've run, we've seen success. And I think one thing that we do want to, and granted this is in kind of silo programmatic in itself, but I think what we do need to now look at is once we take that into the full digital marketing ecosystem, what is the performance versus everything else? Because I think when you look at classic MTA studies, programmatic kind of CPAs, last click, really poor, but then actually, you do see that there is kind of a much higher CPA once you look at kind of like a weighted, like multi-touch and things like that. So, but I think what we need to see is with this new improvement, with the improvement in ad quality, with the improvement in rates, transparency, is that seeing an improvement overall in terms of programmatic and Alkimi's impact on the overall performance chain. So I think that's probably the next stage of it, but at least within the silo of programmatic, we've seen great performance improvement through this kind of methodology of buying.
Yeah, I think a simple metric that we had from that was you got 3 video ads for the price of 1. Yeah. And video completion rate went up by close to 20% as well. So it's a good first step that we have, and probably one of the more impactful ones in terms of kind of rewiring programmatic. Sam, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, so I think what we've managed to do when we've shifted a significant amount of our budget into digital, we've managed to understand the data signals that can help us optimize. We also then realize that there's within media intelligence, which is what this transparency and all the tech stack we put in together, that only gives you roughly around 25% effectiveness on your ROI. Like 50% is on creative, right? And making sure you get that right. And that's one of the key things we're focusing on now, is trying to have the same level of intelligence on our creativity work stream that we do on media. And I think that's one of the things that was a kind of aha moment. We can optimize and get a little 3-4% over here, 5% over here. But there was a whole load of work streams on creativity. We were still putting TV ads on Facebook and programmatic channels. And that was limiting the effectiveness of that. So that's the next work stream we're working on to really elevate, right, fit for platform, fit for resonance type of creative that really takes consumer insights and apply them in the programmatic work chain. That will further amplify the ROIs that we get. That will further unlock bigger budgets for us.
Yeah, I think we've been thinking about a lot about this subject, and as enablers, of course, as the cookie disappears, the ability to retarget people with different types of creative, of course, also diminishes. So what we thought was to have a new ad format which allows you to take over the full page and buy all the media programmatically across the page. So you can run a video ad in conjunction with talking about a product description and a call to action, effectively running sequential advertising. But of course, it's up to you what goes in that. So hopefully we can work together on that piece as well.
There's a lot to be said in terms from a sustainability perspective as well there. Having the right format for the right platform is absolutely crucial, just in the same way as running a 30-second TV ad as a pre-roll slot is no one's going to watch it. They're going to hit skip, unless it's a good loop ad, of course. But, you know, you cut that down to a 20-second creative, or you cut that down to a 6-second creative. You are, you know, saving money on your ad serving costs, and you're also reducing the amount of carbon that ultimately you're, you know, creating through all the amount of data transmission required to get your ad to serve. So there are a lot of really interesting sort of the benefits that come out of just being a lot more triggering a lot of behavior change within your organizations and unpicking, well, that's just the way we've always done things, and, you know, reversing things rather than having to reverse engineer and like, oh, if we use this extra intermediary, then we're going to get this kind of transparent, but a real sort of go back to basics, kind of like, what are we trying to achieve? How are we trying to achieve it? But also, what are the downward impacts that come as a consequence, carbon being one of them, prioritising better quality publishers being another in order to fund a free and open internet. Paywalls don't work, as we were saying earlier on, like they're infuriating. So, you know, I think, you know, anything that for years people have been talking about supply path optimization and still really, really sort of being wary of it. But carbon feels like such an important sort of hook to be able to hang it on as well, because, you know, you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't touch it. It's very ephemeral, the idea of carbon online and things like that. So ultimately, all these things ladder into a much more sort of sustainable view across just working better, being better.
I totally agree on that. I think you probably have a very unique insight across this room in terms of what multiple brands are thinking from an environmental standpoint. I'd love to hear more about how you've seen the shift in over the last few years in terms of brands thinking about carbon emissions?
Yeah, definitely. I guess there's been a bit of a movement over the past 2 years within the industry. There are a number of organisations that are operating in this space. Good Loop is one, Scope 3, Impact Plus, a couple of others, Sadara. And that movement has been really, really good in terms of putting carbon on the agenda. But I think we need to be wary of it just being a trend for 2024. That's not going to get us anywhere. That's not going to save the planet. Not that I think that it's incumbent on the advertising industry to save the planet, but the advertising industry is hugely influential, both as an industry and in terms of the communications that brands put out, and in terms of what creative agencies build and create. The shift has been pretty impressive. I think a few years ago you would have had companies being very, very cautious about I don't know if we want to talk about this yet. We're not ready. This pursuit of perfection is incredibly admirable, right? But it also, what it does is it stifles progress, as we all know. So you end up with situations whereby people aren't being accused of greenwashing, they're being accused of green hushing, which is a whole other phenomena, which is we're doing the work, we're doing a really good job, but we're not going to tell anyone about it. And when you don't tell the industry about it, again, other companies aren't going to come up to the plate in that respect. So the trend has been, rapid, but again, there's that disconnect between, as I was saying earlier on, what your brand is saying as a corporate value versus how it's buying its media, programmatic advertising is inherently inefficient in that respect. You have thousands of bids taking place on one single ad unit on one web page, and only one wins, and ultimately everything else is just carbon wastage. Same with viewability. If you're getting a 75% viewability score, great, that's awesome. Still 25% of wastage that could have been avoided. Or post-bid blocking, things like that. So you have to do so much more work at the beginning in order to get an outcome that's really, really good from a performance perspective and from a low carbon perspective. But I think the key thing here is for us to avoid it being a trend is for this to become a hygiene factor within the quality of a campaign delivery. So performance, viewability, brand safety, IVT, and carbon. It all becomes part of that. Have we done the right thing here? Have we delivered a good quality campaign?
I second that. I think what kicked off the kind of media focus on sustainability was maybe 5-10 years ago. A lot of companies like ourselves were making pledges to reduce CO2 by 2030. And then suddenly I think someone realized that they're never going to achieve their pledge if they don't tackle media, because that's one of the biggest line items in their P&L. And everyone's talking about factory production, they're talking about distribution and making sure they had the vans were electric and the warehouses were all operating, reduced lights, etc., etc. And then someone said, what about your media plan? And that was a kind of aha moment where my boss, who's the CMO, but he's also the head of sustainability at Reckitt, was like, what's our plan? And that's when 2 years ago, we didn't have one. We're like, okay, yeah, we need to get our arse into gear. And I think now we're working with one of those partners that you've mentioned. We're trying to assess now, but I think it's also an industry issue, similar to what I said about the lack of transparency. There's a lack of standards in CO2 emissions. Every agency have got their own carbon calculator. I work with a lot of my peers on the WFA board, World Federation of Advertisers. And we were in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and that's one of the key things that was frustrating. You put one media plan, you give it to Dentsu, they'll give you a CO2 emission score. You put it into Publicis, and you get a different version. You put it into a WPP one, different version. You get a different outcome. So one of the key things we're trying to do is standardize the methodology. And that's, once again, taking months and months, because you've got platforms, you've got advertisers, you've got agencies all wanting a stake. And when you've got too many cooks, you don't get the consensus. So what we've tried to do is basically work with Net Zero to say, look, the clients should be the ones setting the definitions. It's their money up, fundamentally funding the industry. So they put the requirements in, and hopefully by that should speed up a standardization of CO2 emissions. Because without that, everyone's going to tick a box and say, I'm doing it, but not really care if it's really doing it. And I think that's the biggest thing.
Can I just add a little thing to that? So I absolutely agree with everything you're saying there. I think just to provoke that a little bit, I think our biggest issue at the moment is the way companies are measuring success, because the amount of times in my whole, like at least in the last 5 years, especially with the likes of Good Loop and other partners like that, whenever we put them on the plan, we run a campaign and, CPMs might be a little bit higher, or, performance might not be as good, and, immediately not just you, but immediately the question is, it's like, oh, come on, we've got to improve performance, we've got to deliver CPAs. At the end of the day, they've got monthly sales targets they've got to hit, they've got monthly performance targets they've got to hit clients, and as much as they like the idea, or as a business they want to hit that idea, there isn't within clients, like you said, there isn't like an industry standard in which it is measurable to say, here is our like efficiency performance, that it can be like part and parcel with CPAs, CPMs, and efficiency performance, and therefore you're measuring success across all three parameters. At the moment, it's just not there, like you said, and until that changes, and until we bring some way where clients actually start stepping forward and saying, you know what, not forget about the CPAs, but let's make that the second priority or third priority. That's the only way that we're going to see this come about, and it's tricky.
It's those levers, like, can I forego this percentage to achieve a much more sustainable campaign overall? But also, this is still really nascent. So, actually, when agencies say we've got carbon calculators, they're not calculators. They're approximations. They're estimators. A calculator will tell you 2 + 2 = 4, but really what we're working with is, it looks like it might be about 17 grams of CO2 equivalents, which incorporates methane, blah, 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 blah. So it's still, it's still very nascent, and the technology is still evolving. When I look at our product that we have now versus what we took out to market last year, oh my God, like leaps and bounds, because we needed to have that data in order to be able to build better tools that will make things better ultimately. So you have to have it. You have to have a bunch of pioneers prepared to do those experiments, do those A/B tests, put their budget where their mouth is as well. Like invest in this kind of technology to improve things overall for the industry. And there does feel like there's quite a lot of the expression is pre-competitive, but there's so much collaboration between brands and between agencies and tech platforms on this one subject as well. It's really interesting, more so than DE&I, more so than other areas. This one is really, really important because ultimately, whatever happens with the climate is going to have a knock-on effect on businesses, like access to resources, access to materials, access to ingredients. All of that is impacted ultimately. And as you say, yes, it's very easy when you're talking about Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. Like when you see big claims that like we're going to reduce our Scope 2 emissions by 50%, that's really easy to do. Like it's super, super simple. You get a fleet of electric vehicles, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. It's that Scope 3 onward kind of out of your control area that's really, really difficult. And brands are making pledges, but the really good thing that we're seeing is brands are also revising those pledges, which shows that they're doing the work. Like it shows that they're investigating and analysing how the timeline within which they can achieve that net zero pledge as well. So like it's kind of okay. Ideally we want it all done by 2030. Land the plane, let's get this done. But it's kind of okay for those things to shift as long as people are actively taking steps to reduce overall, right? You're not going to get to zero overnight unless you turn everything off. And that's not going to happen.
Yes, I feel like we could talk about this for a long time,
God.
but I was given the 5-minute warning a little while ago.
My polemic.
But on that point, it's probably worthwhile mentioning when you look up Good Loop, B Corp's website, Alkimi and Good Loop are the only two ad tech companies that have the plaque. But moving on to questions, we could open up some questions to the room. Whilst you guys think of a question, I have one question for you, Sherrick. As a bit of an elephant in the room, as a lot of the agencies might be thinking, as you increase transparency and reduce fees, how do agencies continue to make revenue from the partners, which they've been used to, of course, getting agreements from in terms of preferred partnerships? Have you guys thought about that?
Yeah, really good question. Luckily, I'm not in the investment team, so I don't really need to worry about it. So I'll be quite honest with you. Like, personally, the way I see it is that it comes down to the idea of auditing again, right? It's around us incentivizing high quality media. And I think if we can reestablish terms, rates, investment with companies who are actually making all these pledges, exactly like you've mentioned, I absolutely think they should be rewarded for that. I think, you know, as agencies, we should be rewarded for that, for making those innovations and steps forward. I think, you know, clients inherently will make the profit. I think that revenue will just flow through. But I do think fundamentally it does start right from the base. Where is that media impression just kind of being delivered? And as long as that all kind of filters all the way through, I do think revenue will start flowing through. But I do agree, like there will be a lot of partners in this new auditing world, in this new world where actually we're removing a lot of this dead weight, let's call it, where, yeah, agencies going to lose out on a fair amount of investment money, but fundamentally we're cleaning it up and it needs to be done. So, like, in a world where I'm not getting bonused on the investment, that's fine, I can say that, but there are teams out there who will probably think otherwise.
Yeah, there's the early mover advantage, of course. Question over there.
So I was going to, you were obviously talking about the carbon footprint, and you came back with, you know, a lot of teams have KPIs that they need to deliver, and therefore it actually becomes quite difficult to offset the carbon footprint when you want to maximise revenue and money. Do you feel or think that, you know, in a sense you probably need to get, whether it be government involved in some sort of way to basically reward, like by the way you've reduced footprint, but also here's a payment in a sense from us to sort of speed up that process and stay in line with the. Is that a way of potentially making that quicker, or how do you think this is going to work to speed it up?
I mean, I can answer it from what we're doing at Reckitt. So we've put a framework, we call it the responsible media framework, and hopefully in a year's time it'll just be the media framework, because it would be by design. Because what we go to our markets is we talk about sustainability. You've got to basically reduce your carbon footprint. You've got to basically make sure that you use partners that are compliant with GDPR, and you've got to basically make sure that you expand your supply list, so include underserved, underrepresented audiences. You've got to make sure that you focus on high attention placements. So the markets are like just saying, what the fuck is going on here? Right? Every time Sam opens his mouth, it's just more work for me. So what we've tried to do is put a framework into, and we've basically said, this is going to reduce your inventory. Right? We're going to cut the fat. So what's going to happen is your CPMs are going to go up. Right? But we believe that the offset in effectiveness, you're going to get more revenue from it, so your ROIs will improve. So your costs might be $5 CPM, suddenly it's now 7, but the effectiveness will increase from 4% to 8%, and that'll offset it. So in theory, we won't need a little payment from the government, because we'll see the money in our pocket. Now, if I'm wrong, I might be looking for a new job in about 12 months' time.
You could join us.
But that's the hypothesis, and that's what we've said to our markets. It's good advertising. It's making sure majority of our ads get seen by the right people, with the right impact, with the right principles, and yes, with reduction in CO2. So that's the hypothesis, and we've got a lot of our markets adhering to that. And as a cost-conscious company, we've had have to get our senior stakeholders to agree to the higher prices that we're paying.
Regulation is coming, so around sustainability. So in California, a recent law has passed. You make over $1 billion, you have to start declaring what your Scope 3 emissions are. And the same is happening in Europe as well. I sit on the IAB Europe working group, and there's a lot of stuff about regulation that I don't understand. But there's a lot coming in the next year or so that will require companies to report on it. So and whether that happens just in Europe and just in California, great, it's a win. These are all global organisations as well, so hopefully it becomes endemic in all of their, in all the regions that they're operating in. But ultimately, like, consumers are also going to expect this as well, more and more. Consumers are ultimately, when they buy something, voting for the kind of world that they want to live in, even if it's, you know, what brand of ketchup they're buying or whatever. You know, and brands that fail to match their values will lose, ultimately. So I think there'll be a bit of downward pressure, both from regulation and self-regulation within our industry as well. There's a lot coming from GARM, loads of standards coming in. IAB is still, you know, I don't know if they'll fully ever pick a side, but whatever. It's an hour a week out of my diary, just hanging out. But yeah, it's coming. And I think also that self-regulation and being responsible and leading the way is ultimately what's going to make the difference. And it's behaviour change. That's all we're really needing to do. But yeah, I think it's coming. And it'll just be the way pretty soon.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank the panelists. Round of applause. And we're going to have a break now. Bar's open, and we could continue the conversation over there.